listening to the Agent Survival Guide podcast, a podcast for today's insurance agents. Informing, educating, empowering, improving the way you do business in an industry that's anything but static. In today's episode, we are tackling a very common fear that manifests itself in a few different ways. So there are many ways we refer to it. Sometimes we associate it with performing, so we call it stage fright. Other times we like to get technical, so we go with a literal medical definition. Glossophobia is actually the legit medical term for the fear of public speaking. And then sometimes we like to sugarcoat it and make it sound smaller or more demure, if you will. And we call it being camera shy, when in reality, we might be terrified the minute we hit record. All of these fears can apply to insurance agents of all types, no matter what you're selling, as well as across pretty much any industry that involves presentations. And even if you're not presenting, virtual calls are now a staple of work life. How can we work through that fear in a way that gets us to the other side? What if instead of being afraid of speaking to a room full of our clients or presenting to our coworkers on camera, we could enjoy the experience? That is exactly what Linda Ugelow tackles in her book, Delight in the Limelight, as well as in her workshops. We had a great conversation about how to address and deal with those fears, and how we can all learn to love the spotlight, to feel comfortable being seen and interacting and holding confidence in those interactions. Here's our conversation. Joining me in the studio today, Linda Ugelow. She is an author, a speaker, a TV and podcast host. She's also a speaking empowerment coach, and that is why we have her here today to talk to us about overcoming fear and anxiety related to speaking in front of others. Welcome to the podcast, Linda.
It's so nice to be here, Sarah.
Can you tell us just a little bit more about yourself, the journey you've taken to get to where you are today?
For sure. I have been a performer with a women's world music group for over 4 decades. And during that time, I was mildly aware of how I despised having to introduce a song on stage. But I just figured, you're afraid, you just push through it. And it wasn't ever a problem until I became a coach online and I needed to promote myself. So I took a couple of video classes where I learned to make videos, but I found it pretty terrifying. And then at some point, I was back in 2015, my video instructor said, hey, there's this great new app out called Periscope. It's a new technology of live streaming, and it's going to really change the online space forever. And you got to be an early adopter. And I thought, okay, here I am. I've always been late to things, but I'm going to be an early adopter. I'm going to do this. And all the marketing gurus said, you got to get on daily to build a following. And I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And it was terrifying. They didn't say that. And, people you'd look at your screen on your phone and people would be coming in from India and France and California. And as each person came on, rapidly, and there was no algorithm at that time. It was just, there would be like a blinking light in Boston and people would say, oh, I wonder what's going on there. And they'd just come in. It was very cool on one level. But as the speaker, it was really scary. And I figured, well, after a couple of weeks, I'll be confident because I'll have the experience. I'll be familiar. It'll become easier. And it didn't. I found that I needed to pump myself up every single day. I would be doing kicks and punches and dancing and power poses and meditation and deep breathing and changing my mindset. Every few days, I go back on Google and say, what can I do to overcome my fear of speaking? And I get all of these coping advice.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? It got me on every single day. But after 10 weeks of that, day 75, I thought, my heart is still racing and I don't want it to be racing anymore. I just want it to be gone. I just want this to be something I do in my day and not this huge thing that I have to pump myself up for an hour before I get on for 5 minutes. So I thought, I'm going to get rid of my speaking fear. And it turns out that aside from 40 years of being a performer, which gave me, some skills of being in front of people,
Mm-hmm.
I also had a master's degree in expressive arts therapy, so I have a background in psychology. And I thought, I'm just going to write down all the tools that I know and I'm going to have at it. I'm going to get rid of this fear. And after I made that list that looked very promising, I thought, you know what, before I try to get rid of this fear, what is this fear? What is it even about? So I closed my eyes and I asked if the fear could talk, what would it say? And what came back was, you're going to be attacked. I thought, really? And I thought back to my childhood and I remembered my sisters attacking me every time my mom put me on a pedestal saying, why can't you girls be more like Linda? And all of a sudden it was like, duh, of course I'm afraid of being on camera or the center of attention or speaking from the stage because I learned it was dangerous to be the center of attention. I was always that person in the background who, kept my head down and just kind of blended in. The idea of being out there myself, like I'm doing now, was terrifying. So once I knew I had these issues from the past, and it wasn't just that, after I thought about my family stuff, I thought about other things that probably had impacted my speaking confidence. Like when I was bullied at school or my father saying things like, you'll never succeed at what you want to do, or I'm not interested in what you are interested in, which made me feel like, why would I want to speak about something that people, not just my dad, but people would feel isn't interesting? People aren't interested in me. So all of these meanings that I ascribed to the experiences I had all added up to it's not safe. Once I realized I had all this stuff, I actually happily realized I also had tools to clear them away because I had years in the self-help area.
Mm-hmm.
I knew this very powerful technique for PTSD called emotional freedom technique, which some people know as tapping or EFT. I had done creative visualization since the 80s. I knew how to do all kinds of affirmations. Dance was my modality, so I knew how to use dance therapy to release things. And after 5 days, it was all gone.
Interesting.
And it never came back.
Now, we should probably point out here, your book is called Delight in the Limelight. And you just went through and explained you were very afraid of being in the spotlight. And I think we can all at some point relate to that. I know as I was reading through the book, I liked the fact that you had so many different examples in there of identifying and overcoming fear and anxiety. That's something I've been very vocal about, that I deal with anxiety here. And I've talked about it on the show. I've talked about some of the ways that I deal with it. What's interesting about some of the things that you had mentioned, you said coping mechanisms. And I think sometimes we hear those and it's like, oh, well, you just push through it. We have these sayings or these mantras. And what I liked about what you lay out in your book is that, yes, there might be some type of formula that we can, take from that. There's a method that we can use, but you also couple it with very actionable pieces and things that you take, ways that you're thinking through what you're doing in order to really get at that root fear. So can you maybe talk about that a little bit and maybe talk about using me as that example, the mistakes that we make as we're trying to address those fears?
Yeah. So, it might help if I could hear some of the things that you have, and then I can
So
address.
I think probably one of the things as I was reading through, now I'm not finished with the book yet, but one of the things that I really identified with was, I have this podcast. I'm perfectly okay with being able to talk into a microphone. I can do the camera thing. I can present on stage, but one of the things that I've been looking into getting back into is getting on the stage and singing. And it's been a very long time since I've done that. And why I have such an irrational fear around doing a video audition for singing when in other aspects of my life I am, seemingly doing the same thing.
Yes, yes, yes. This is a very interesting question that you bring up, and one that I found kind of puzzling at first, but then I just accepted it, which is
Mhm.
that you can feel completely comfortable, let's say, speaking from a stage, and
Mhm.
then freak out on camera, or vice versa. Or you
Mhm.
can, I had a client who was comfortable on camera, comfortable on the stage, but in a networking event where you did a go around and had to introduce yourself, he would
Mhm.
go into panic attack.
Huh. Okay.
Most people find a larger number of people to speak to more frightening than a small group. But there are also people who are the opposite. They feel totally fine in front of 1,000, very anonymous. But if it's intimate with a group of 10, that brings up anxiety. So the
Hmm.
same thing with singing and speaking. You can feel completely comfortable singing and uncomfortable speaking,
Mhm.
or vice versa. So it's like everybody has their own unique patterns, experiences, stories that
Mhm.
they come from. And my guess is that with you, there are, just like with anyone speaking, there are going to be reasons why you are afraid.
Mhm.
So maybe it was comparison to other people when you were younger. We'd have to explore this.
Mhm.
It could be your own demands on yourself to be a certain way that you're not reaching.
Mhm.
So I'm speaking from my own experience also, because when I first joined my singing group, I was quite confident, kind of like young, free, confident, even though I didn't have a background in singing. I was totally new. I knew that I had some issues, a few issues with tuning, but I felt very able to listen to someone's singing style from another language and find my way into that same kind of sound or approximate it. I loved languages. I loved working with people from those countries. So I had this confidence. But I found that after, I don't know, about 10 years or so, my confidence started to erode away. My voice became really shaky. I was afraid of hitting high notes.
Mhm.
I suddenly didn't want to do any solos. And by the time actually that I wrote my book, I was in the dumps about my singing. And
Okay.
I actually made a deal with myself that by the time I finished writing my book, I would use all the things that I wrote about in the book to overcome my fear of singing, because I realized several things. And I think maybe you'll relate to this. One was there were things that people had said to me, some of them not truly mean, but enough because I had been criticized that it's kind of like after that criticism, that anytime someone would point out, "Oh, you've got a vibrato," which was a nice way of saying that my voice was warbly, and all of a sudden it would glom onto that other thing, and then I was afraid
Mhm.
to sing in front of that person, and then my husband made a comment, and suddenly I was afraid to sing in front of him, and then my daughter made a comment, and suddenly I was afraid of singing in front of her. So all the people who were closest to me, suddenly I
Mhm.
became really inhibited, and I needed to find my way through. You know, everybody has stuff, right?
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong with it. It's unfortunate that we have it, but we got to deal with it once we have it. I had to look at all the people that I was feeling inhibited from and
Mhm.
using the techniques in the book to clear them away. But then I realized I had another critic, and that was inside my head.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I discovered it because I was working on my voice. This is after I wrote the book, and I have a chapter, by the way, I'm working on the voice, and it totally transformed my speaking voice, and it really got me into loving my singing voice.
Mhm.
So I would be singing, and then all of a sudden I'd say, "You know what? I'm gonna record this because I wanna hear how good I've become." I'd put on the recorder, and all of a sudden I couldn't sing the same way.
Mhm.
Thought, "Isn't that interesting?" nobody else is listening to me, but there's a way that I was demanding a certain level, or I expected to be criticized by myself,
Hmm.
that I realized I was getting in my own way.
Hmm.
I had to change the way I spoke to myself and the kind of expectation I put on myself.
Right, right. Now, I think we all have that little voice in our heads, and sometimes that voice doesn't say very nice things. One of the things that I did really enjoy in your book was the idea of turning around how that voice behaves, some of the ways that you can just even out loud react to those thoughts that are going through your head, and then also how you turn around the feedback that you can take from that voice. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how we take the inner critic, and to use one of your examples, I really liked the idea of turning it into the inner consultant.
Oh, the inner consultant. I like that.
Yeah, I like that one. You had a couple examples in there, but I
Yes.
I like that one the best.
Yes, I tend to favor the inner ally, but I'm always
Mhm.
interested in what people pick. I've heard like inner wizard or inner wise
Mhm.
one. I feel like that part of ourselves that is now like the inner critic is actually a very important part of us that is a voice of discernment.
Okay.
But it's been wounded,
Mm.
and it's almost as if that voice feels like all of a sudden it needs to protect us in a way of like putting us down first before someone else does.
Oh, I can relate to that. That's how anxiety works.
Yes. So now this is not mine. I learned it from the author of The Success Principles, Jack Canfield, in his book, and I adapted it. The idea is that even though this voice is acting out and has a lousy way of expressing itself, underneath it, it does want the best for you. It does want the things that you want. It's not
Mhm.
against you, but it has a lousy way of expressing itself. So we need to up level its communication skills. And we do that by dialoguing with it and saying, okay, so you don't like how my voice was shaky.
Mhm.
What would you have me do? And then listen to all of its wonderful ideas. And it could be, well, instead of holding out a note long, try just short notes and feeling the steadiness of your short note,
Mhm.
and then slowly elongate it. Oh, that's a good idea. What else could I do? Well, maybe you could breathe out on a sibilant like shh or or zzz, and feel the strength of your out breath, and
Mhm.
feel how the sound of your voice can just ride on that breath. Okay, that's good. What else? Well, maybe I should, or I could ease up on expecting everything to be perfect. Let's say that it's okay if you don't get it right. That would be really nice. What else can we do? So you kind of go
Mhm.
on, and you build a relationship with that voice inside you so that you really do feel like it's on your side, that you're on the same team and you're facing the same goal.
Right. Now let's say maybe let's shift that from me with singing to an insurance agent with, we talk a lot about having educational seminars or sales seminars where you are speaking in front of a group of people. And if they are, having that kind of response that they're great one-on-one, maybe they're great in one-on-two or three, but then when they get in front of larger groups of people, they really find themselves having a hard time articulating what they're trying to say. They are nervous beforehand. What are some kind of things that they could do in that instance if those are kind of their triggers?
Absolutely. So we already talked about clearing the past experiences. I mean, like if you are prepared, if you've prepared what you're
Mhm.
going to do and you've practiced it to some degree, like if you're not prepared, that's going to create anxiety. That goes without saying. But
Mhm.
let's say you are, then it's pretty clear that there's something else going on, and it's worth looking at, because why do you want that to be in the way? When you have things from the past, it pulls you out from being in the present. We want to be able to be grounded and focused and present and just there. and to enjoy the experience. But if you've got these other things that are hanging on you, it's to prevent that. So that's why we clear that away. And the same thing with our mental, what we're doing inside our own heads. We need to make sure that we are the most encouraging and supportive voice inside our own heads. I had one client who was a COO of a tech startup. And it turned out he didn't have anything in his background that he could think of that was negative. However, he was the valedictorian of his class, and he conflated being the best with his worthiness. So just think, it's not just getting 100, it's like getting 103 on everything. So if he spoke and he stumbled over his words, which is like nothing, or he forgot his place, he got distracted, or if he rambled or it went off on a tangent, that was a failure. And he felt awful about his speaking, like, what's the matter with you? Why can't you do this? And if you have someone say to you, what's the matter with you? Why can't you do this? Look at that other person. They're a natural. You're so boring. I mean, how would you feel around that person? Not safe. So if you have that voice in your head, you're not going to feel safe. So yes, get rid of those past experiences and change what you're thinking. Next, you need to practice and swap out your previous attitudes about things. Nothing is too small to practice. So if we want to feel fine about having the attention on us, we have to practice feeling fine having the attention on us. So literally in my program section of Comfy on Camera, we literally practice relaxing in front of the camera. We just kind of go through like, okay, I'm relaxing my eyes, I'm relaxing my shoulders. Now I'm breathing, and we narrate our experience. We practice relaxing. Then we practice greeting the camera. You can practice greeting the audience just at home, like, hello, everybody. I'm so happy to hear you. How do you want to feel about your audience? Do you want to feel open-hearted? Do you want to feel like these are my best friends? These are my fun colleagues. These are people who have the same interests as me. We're in this together. I want to share what I know so that they can be helped. I want to be of service. So you have to practice feeling that way.
Okay.
And then you practice receiving attention. It's like, whoa, thank you for paying attention to me. And you just relax and receive it like it's a gift. And you practice that. And then suddenly when you're there in front of people, you've already practiced it. And you just say, here I am. I'm happy to see you. And I'm grateful that you're giving me the space to share.
Okay.
And it's like a discipline. It's like, if you don't know what it's like to relax, if you can't sit at a pool and just feel chill, you're not going to feel chill standing in front of people, or on camera. That's why it's a discipline. It's like you've got to practice it. But the thing is, it's not going to be easy if you've got triggers. That's why we clear that stuff away. That's why we clear your mind, because you want to be present. You want to be here right now.
It's funny how quickly it's like, well, those things that I'm thinking, those are kind of silly. And I was thinking that as I was reading through and you were laying out all the different ways that we do talk to ourselves and how, we wouldn't say those things to other people. We wouldn't say it to our loved ones. And if we can take it and then run it through that filter, like I like the one that you suggested of running it through the filter of, would you say that to your daughter? Because I have a daughter as well. And would I say, no, I wouldn't say that. But why do I say it to myself? There's work there to do as well.
Yeah.
So with some of this, with the inner critic, inner consultant, a lot of what you've just suggested sounds like it could be really helpful if we are suffering from imposter syndrome. We have mentioned that here on the show before. I think it's something that women tend to deal with. Not sure if that is the case, if you've seen that actually statistically, but can you talk a little bit more about how to actually overcome imposter syndrome and why it is that we tend to think that we aren't smart enough, we're not good enough, everybody's going to know that we don't have it figured out?
I feel like imposter syndrome is similar to the fear of speaking in that it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It always has its root causes. Before I get into that, I just want to mention that, of course, if you're doing something new, you're going to be new at it. And we have to allow ourselves to be a beginner and to not be so great. And that's okay. But unfortunately, we grow up in an educational system that values knowing things right away, even though you haven't learned it yet. It's
Right.
like if somebody already knows how to read, they're praised for that, even though it hasn't been taught in school yet. Maybe they just learned it from their parents or whatever. And the same with everything else. So it makes sense that people are afraid of making mistakes and they feel like they're supposed to know everything already, even though rationally, there's no reason for you to know everything when you're just starting out.
Right.
Being able to adopt a beginner's mindset and just honor and appreciate wherever you are in your journey and not feeling like you have to make excuses or be anywhere else than where you are. It's okay. And even if you're going into a new position, it's okay that you don't know how to do stuff. I mean, if you already know how to do stuff, you may be ready to move on to the next thing. So you're always growing. That being said, imposter syndrome, like when you said that feeling of like you're never enough, the question is, who were you never enough for? And very often it'll be clear, oh, mom, dad, my uncle, the priest, that teacher, that there was someone who, no matter what you did, it was never going to be good enough. You were never going to win their high regard, their respect. And there are other things that can happen as well. For instance, I had one client who is in a very high position in a tech company that everybody knows. And she had this feeling of imposter syndrome. And it turned out that she had, as a kid, been in a gifted kids program. However, when she had tested for it, she didn't get in. But her father, who was on the school board, finagled her way in for her. And one day, some other kid said, you're not supposed to really be here. Your dad got you here. And even though she's an adult, that comment had always stuck with her that she didn't really belong.
Yeah.
So these are just a couple of instances of where that imposter syndrome comes from. But it's like, okay, so there's stuff. Let's clear it out.
One of my favorite sayings that I have mentioned here on the podcast before is people make mistakes. That's why they make erasers. And I think I like that saying because it kind of casts the mistake almost as like it's an inevitability rather than it's a negative thing. And I think we've almost been conditioned to think of mistakes or like you were saying, the idea of being a beginner that you don't know what you don't know, but just because you're learning doesn't necessarily mean you're bad at what you're doing. You just sort of haven't gotten there yet. But that being said, if mistakes are inevitable, how can we handle making a mistake when we speak? Because that is, I think, for some of us, what prompts a lot of the fear around speaking in front of others.
Yes, yes. And, again, school. We had red marks. We got demoted, in our grades for every single mistake we made. Now, what I thought was interesting is when I learned about R&D, research and development, they plan on at least half of their efforts being flubs.
Okay.
Because there's no way to discover things unless you experiment, and not all the experiments are going to come out. So I think that has also helped me. I love the eraser, but also just like mistakes are our way of learning.
Mm-hmm.
And if everything always works out, we don't really necessarily know why. When we have something that doesn't make the mark, there's more learning to be had from it. I really wish that the whole school system would change rather than we get graded for not making any mistakes, that we get graded for taking risks and creating experiments and then just reflecting on it. Like, what's wrong with that? That's a perfectly good way and a less traumatic way of learning. So when we speak, there are several different kinds of mistakes we can make. One is we can stumble over our words. We can forget what we were saying. We can, what else? We might say the wrong thing.
Oh, saying things out of order, like getting ahead of yourself.
Order, getting ahead, like skipping something and realize, oh my God, I didn't say this thing. Yeah, getting out of order. My favorite way of thinking about it is to let myself be, number one, amused by the mistakes I make, because we're all making mistakes. And who doesn't like a good blooper reel? I mean, come on. We love those. So if you think about making mistakes as being something that people can relate to and makes us human, then it's like, oh, good. Now people aren't thinking, oh, she's so perfect. Rather, oh, she makes mistakes too. After the pandemic, I did my first live talk and I was giving information in a new way. And in one of the sections, I had a list of 6 things. And I said to myself, Linda, there's no way you're going to remember these 6 things. And then I said, fine, I'll forget. And that'll give me an opportunity to say, I can't remember number 5, but it'll come back to me. Don't worry. So, what I recommend is to have a couple of ways in your back pocket that you can handle tripping over your words or forgetting something. Another thing I could have said is if I, let's say, lose my place, I could say, what was I just saying? That's actually audience interaction. That gives people a chance to say, oh, you were just saying this. Oh, yeah, right. Thanks.
And that's clever because that's something that I don't know that we always think of if we're on stage presenting, that the idea of the audience as being there and being engaged to the point of participation.
Yep. I was giving a talk at a conference a year ago and the internet went out. And I turned, I said, okay, what do I do now? And someone said, do you have it in your download? I said, yes, I do. Okay, just hang on. So it's kind of like we're all in this together. Bring the audience in with us. It's fine. So, okay, we talked about like if we lose our place, you can ask, where was I? If you stumble over your words, you can just disregard it and keep going and just repeat yourself. Or you can even go blah, 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 if you feel like you really got into like a big stumble and then just move on. If you're out of place, there are 2 things that come to my mind right away. One is, do they really need it in order to move on? Because they don't know that you plan to say that other thing. And if they're still with you and if it makes logical sense, I wouldn't worry about it. 2 other ways you could handle is, I just realized I didn't tell you about X. Let me tell you about X.
That sounds like it's, it frames it as being this appealing secret little nugget of wisdom. And just saying it that way, I would never have guessed that, oh, this is me coming back to a point that I didn't remember.
Right. That's why I say it's kind of like, how can we make it fun? Making mistakes as something that's interesting. So, in improv, you work with things that come up. And so, like as a musician, when I did musical improv, if you made a mistake, quote unquote, a mistake, and it was a note that didn't belong there, you come back to it and you make it a part of the piece. And you make it into a little motif or a design. And it's the same thing with speaking, that we can, let's say everyone's going to make mistakes at some point. What are they? How do I want to handle them? And you pre-pave the way. You think, well, I can do these things. And then you imagine doing those things.
Okay.
Imagine going through that list and say, I can't remember that 3rd one, but I know it's going to come back to me. So let's just move on.
Okay.
Or if I don't think of it, I'll send it out an email.
That's clever
And that's
as well.
another way to like re-engage. So, I often like to plan on making mistakes for those very reasons.
Okay. One of the things that you kind of triggered another question that I wanted to ask here, and I think this is probably really common with insurance agents and probably anybody giving any type of presentation and taking questions as you go. How do we handle that idea of we're supposed to know everything? We're supposed to be this like encyclopedia of knowledge, or at least that's what we think of ourselves as. And what do we do if somebody asks a question and we don't know the answer? Then what?
I don't know that answer, but I'll look it up and get back to you.
Right.
Or I don't know that answer. Anyone here have any experience with that?
That was something I think in the book that I really wanted to hear the inflection of you saying that, because I think we do tend to think that we have to know everything, and that in the business of insurance where we have so much that is a certain way, we have compliance things, there are certain things that we can and cannot say. I think that is, in addition to some of the fear that goes along with it, is that, we're going to say the wrong thing or we're going to not know what to say. But if we're not able to answer a question, there's absolutely no reason why you can't say, hey, I don't know, but I can find out for you, or let me take a minute to look this up. I'm thinking that I know what this is. I think I know what you're asking, but I just want to be sure, so that I don't make it more confusing or anything like that. And that goes along with what you were saying about your audience doesn't know the script of the presentation or, how anything is supposed to go, that they're probably going to be a little bit more forgiving than what you think they're going to be.
Absolutely. And, the other thing to remember is that very few people remember. Like in 2 weeks, how much will they remember from your talk? Well, they might have taken notes, and hopefully there were a few things that really, stood out for them. And that's what we hope, is that there'll be, like, even from this podcast, I hope there'll be 1 or 2 things that people say, oh, that was really meaningful, and it'll stick with them. Will they remember our whole conversation? No. So I think we do the best to be of service and to create an experience that help people learn and be better at their jobs or whatever, the purpose of the presentation is. But we don't have to be a rock star every single time. It may be that you would love to feel like you're that kind of a presenter, and we can aspire to that. But we can also enjoy the journey. So again, it's what I said earlier, honor yourself for exactly where you are in the process. If you're just starting off giving presentations, be really celebratory that you're actually doing it and you're showing up. That is terrific. By the way, as I'm saying this, I'm just reminded that something I'm working on right now is a speaker log and journal to prepare ourselves for the speaking that we do, and to give a space to debrief what we do so that we can be growing. Because a lot of times it's easy to go about speaking like, we did it, okay, it's over, where's the bar? And then that's the last we think of it again.
Right.
It's the next one. And so there is, of course, a natural way that we improve over time. But when we're intentional about it, like if we take some time before and say, okay, I confess I have these concerns. I'm worried about XYZ. What do I want to remember? I want to remember that I'm here to serve. I want to remember that we're all on the same team, that we're all learning from each other, that I don't have to be perfect. How do I want the audience to feel? I want them to feel hopeful or excited or like relieved, whatever it might be. What are 6 words that I want to feel for myself? Oh, I want to feel calm, grounded, open, relaxed, happy, whatever it is. And then on the other side, the same kind of thing, like, what did I like? I wish was different. What are some notes that I want to take for next time? These kinds of things, so that we can feel like as we continue on our speaking journey, that we are actually moving forward toward being that kind of speaker that we dream of being.
Right. One of the things I like that you said there, just the idea of what we can do to look over what we are hoping for the audience to feel and what we want them to get out of what we are trying to give them. I'm guessing that was something that you considered prior to writing the book as you sat down, how do I want people to feel as they're reading this book?
Absolutely. Mean delight in the limelight?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And I have a writing coach, AJ Harper. That's exactly how she starts everyone out, is who is this book for? How do you want them to feel? What's your promise to them? And what's your core message?
Okay, because I can definitely say that the tone in which it was written was very approachable. I didn't feel like a frenetic energy as I was reading it. I felt very calm as I was reading it. There were a lot of things as I came across them, was like, okay, like that makes sense. There was a very positive, upbeat tone to it. And I think, obviously, you take your own advice. But I appreciated that as I was reading through, because I feel like sometimes when we're getting or giving advice, one of my mom's favorite things to say, and yes, it inspired a great work ethic in me, but, do it anyway. there's a lot of times that is the energy behind what I'm doing is, it needs to be done. Nobody else is going to do it. I'm the one that has to do it. So I'm just going to do it anyway. And I like the idea that there can be kind of a better, more positive, upbeat tone and a way of thinking behind it that you can use to be more mindful about how you're even approaching a situation.
Yeah, I like that you're bringing this up. And I think it's because I feel like life is short and we may as well have the best experience that we can.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the places where a lot of people aren't having a good experience. And yet, speaking is our human design. We speak to people from morning till night, oftentimes.
Mm-hmm.
Why not have it be something that we relish?
Exactly. Is there anything else that you would suggest that we do to take the fear out of speaking so we can perform with confidence, but also feel comfortable while we're doing that?
Well, I don't want to open up a whole new thing, but if you warm up your voice
Mm-hmm.
and you stretch out your body and you think about, come up with a mantra for how you want to be, those three things are going to help you be more present in your speaking because your body will be open, which means you'll take up more space.
Mm-hmm.
Your voice will be more secure because you'll have made some sounds before you have to open your mouth in front of people. Because I really feel like when we learn to love the sound and the experience of making sounds with our voice, that adds a whole new dimension to loving being in the limelight. Because there's something about the vibration in our sound, the magic that we're actually able to formulate words that have meaning. And then when we connect to ourselves on that level, all of a sudden, it's like we tap into the mystery of being a human being that can speak.
Is there anything else that you would like to touch on? Maybe a point that you are passionate about that we didn't get to cover as we were talking through we got a little bit deeper on some of the points, but is there anything else that you would like to mention here today?
I would just reiterate this idea of mental rehearsal that I touched on earlier about like imagining making mistakes and how you'll handle them.
Mm-hmm.
That, from the book, that chapter 2, I talk about mental rehearsal because I think it's one of the most powerful tools that we have to imagine an experience. So when you're practicing or rehearsing for a presentation, stop practicing what you're going to say and imagine how you want to feel and just close your eyes. Imagine being in that room, in front of those people, and imagine just the way you want to feel there and see yourself expressing yourself and speaking just the way you would like to see yourself doing that. Just indulge yourself with that fantasy for a little bit. And if you do that on a regular basis, so you do that several times before you actually have to give a presentation, it will change how you feel.
All right. Well, Linda, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us. I know I've learned a lot today. I learned a lot from reading the book, and I think our audience has too. So really appreciate you taking the time to chat today.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you, Sarah.
Special thanks again to Linda Ugelow. If you like what you heard in this episode, I highly recommend picking up a copy of her book, Delight in the Limelight. You can do that with the link in our episode notes. And we also have the link to her blog, her podcast, and the link to her official website. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next episode. The Agent Survival Guide podcast is a production of Ritter Insurance Marketing, an integrity company. Special thanks to our guest, Linda Ugelow. This episode was recorded and produced by me, Sarah Ruppel, script proofing by Tina Lamoureux, podcast design by Urban Rivera, artwork by Vivian Zhao. Rate and review our show on Apple or Spotify.